Welcome to Golf Smarter Mulligans, your second chance to gain insight and advice from the best instructors featured on the Golf Smarter podcast. Great golf instruction never gets old. Our interview library features hundreds of hours of game improvement conversations like this that are no longer available in any podcast app.
The excitement level on the PGA Tour in terms of the number of players that golfers around the world can identify with and or it excites new people into the game, it certainly doesn't hurt. I think from a golf course construction perspective, in general, I think what it does follow more so than anything is the economy. The last boom, really prior to the late 50s, early 60s, was in the 20s, and during another economic boom in the United States. That time frame, actually, we had Bobby Jones and Walter Hagen and so forth. But if you look at the period in the 30s and the 40s and even early 50s, when you had Hogan and Snead and Mr. Nelson, there was a broad interest in the game following those guys. You didn't see much in the way of golf course development just because the economy wasn't very good.
Why'd you refer to him as Mr. Nelson and the other guys by their first name?
With another interview from the archives of Golf Smarter, here's your host, Fred Green.
Welcome back to Golf Smarter, Tripp.
How are you?
I'm doing quite well. How are you? It's been a while since you've been on the show, and for a lot of our listeners who've never met you before, Tripp was like on one of the first couple episodes and was, I think, maybe the first golf architect that I ever had a chance to talk to at length. So it's worth having you back because of your insights on golf design. So it's great to have you.
Well, it's good to be here. We've been busy, thankfully, since we last talked.
That's a good thing in this these days for somebody to be busy, especially in this industry, right?
Well, the economy has really affected new course work in the United States. There's really, I've only heard of, I think, 3 new golf courses that are going in the U.S. right now.
Really?
And but the restoration market in the U.S., even though it's slowed in some ways, especially at some of the private clubs that we've worked with for a long time, that market is still and is still going to some extent. And in large measure because as the economy has done what it's done, the competition for new members is higher, and so they have to make sure that they use their capital in such a way that they keep good enough to be able to maintain, retain existing members and attract new members, basically stay up with the Joneses.
When there's only 3 new projects that you've heard of going on in the United States, are those resort courses, private courses, public courses? Who's building right now in the U.S.?
Well, as I understand, there's one project that Native Americans are doing as part of a casino.
Okay.
In Washington.
There seems to be a lot of those going up, huh? Well, I mean, I've seen a lot of golf courses associated with the Indian resorts.
Well, they've got money, and it's an attraction for largely for their casinos, and so we've done one in Oklahoma that we did 7 years ago now, and it's an attraction to their casinos, and because they're turning such kind of unbelievable amounts of money in their casinos, they can afford it.
Sure.
And so it helps the revolving door that they have. But the other 2 that I'm aware of, one is in Florida, which is a private club, and then the other one that I know of is in California, which is another private club.
Yeah, or somebody's own backyard type of thing, like a Justin Timberlake building his own golf course type of thing, right?
Right. And there may be some others out there that I don't know about, but, talking to a lot of the builders and other people in the industry, those are the only 3 that I'm aware of.
And when you say you talk to builders, that's different than the architects, right? There's the architects and they're the people who do the actual construction work, and those who you're talking to, the builders?
Right.
Right.
And in large measure, the reason why we're talking to the builders a lot is because they're calling us wondering if we have any work coming out. And so, you hear a lot about what's going on through them, and you hear from just different people in the industry, but
Sure.
The United States golf course builders are really struggling right now because you had, 10 years ago, you had 100 different companies out there competing for a decent amount of work, and now you've got, you had 100 companies. That number's been cut substantially, but
Sure.
You're talking about, in dollar volume, you're talking about 10% of the work that was there 10 years ago.
Wow. And they must have, I would imagine the builders versus architects must have a tremendous overhead.
They do. Just simply because they're having to carry so much more insurance, they're having to keep on larger staffs, the equipment ownership, maintenance, and so forth is significantly higher.
I'm curious. Well, let's say there's a builder based in the Northwest. Well, let's just say the Southwest of the United States, and he gets a project in the Midwest. Does he rent all that gear when to move the earth, or does he bring his own with him?
It depends on the company. Some of the bigger companies will have their own machinery.
Wow.
Some of the smaller ones will typically rent. Even some of the bigger companies now have diluted themselves with a lot of their machinery, and the projects they are doing, they're renting a good bit of the equipment. And which makes a lot of sense because, if you can sell off part of those assets to keep your cash higher, then you can survive through these times. And when you do get a project, you just build the cost of the rental into your cost of your project.
And when you say these times, I know that the world, let alone the United States, but the global economy is struggling all over the place. Do you see the golden years like we just had over you were talking about the last 10 years in golf course new construction? Do you see that ever coming back?
Well, it's hard to say. I've talked to some architects that were practicing back in the late 60s, early 70s when we went through a similar situation where there was no new course work, basically late 60s, early 70s. And Reese Jones, for one, was telling me that when he struck out on his own, there wasn't a lot of work out there at all. He said, it wasn't nearly as bad as it is now, but it was pretty bad. And there was, the discussion then was, it's never going to be the same as it once was. Because, in the late 50s, early 60s, there was a big boom in golf course construction. And then we went through it again in the late 80s, early to mid to almost late 90s. And so it's hard to say. The reason why people were building golf courses back then, in both of those time periods, was largely real estate driven. And unless our population slows down, we're going to be building more homes at some point in the future, and it's hard to say whether or not it will come back in the same way that it did. The game of golf itself has got to continue to grow in order for there to be a demand. But I think as much as anything, I think what may change, Fred, is that instead of building new ones, we may be going back into the older ones and completely rebuilding them. Reconstruction projects. We just finished one in Mexico where we took two older golf courses and built a completely new golf course where they didn't have a need for two golf courses. So I think you're going to see more of that in the future. It's really hard to say whether actual new construction is ever going to rebound to the point that it has been. But I think rebuilding older courses, basically in the new golf courses, is going to be a lot more active.
You were saying that when he got started, you said Reese Jones, right? When he was getting started in the 60s, it was tough for him, and it's probably not so hard for him anymore, but anybody getting started in any industry is going to be struggling until you establish your name, which he did, and now he probably is thinking that business is great.
Well, yeah, Reese built a great name for himself, and, he's been able to carry that over into other markets, too. China's the big market now. We've got one project over there right now. and Reese is very active over there.
And the whole Jones family seems to be busy all the time, right?
Yeah, Mr. Jones Jr. is the project that we have. We actually competed against him to get it, and he's got a base in Japan, and they do a lot of work in Asia, but he always has.
Yeah.
And
you beat him out for that job?
Yeah, we were fortunate in that. We're a smaller company.
Sure. So is it a price thing, or congratulations?
No,
That's awesome.
It was more of a we're going to give you more attention scenario, because we only do 1 or 2 new courses at a time, whereas he's got, I think right now they've got 10 or 11 going around the world, plus they're competing for the Olympic project. And so that's, where we fit into the niche in the marketplace is with clients that are more concerned with the quality of the project and really are more comfortable having someone that's going to be on site constantly and more involved. That's whereas Mr. Jones, they developed the machinery to be able to produce good work and more mass and more quantity. Our focus is a little bit more on 1 or 2 projects at a time, and so it just comes down to sometimes the name recognition versus what we have to offer in terms of greater commitment and time for each project.
Sure, and I would think that a property owner in their marketing would want to weigh the fact, do we want to pay this much so we can say that we have a Robert Trent Jones Jr. course, or do we just say that we have a new course and you don't necessarily know that it's going to be a Tripp Davis or a Tripp Davis Associates course, right?
Well, the thing that's kind of neat about the China market is that right now it's the same way we were back in the 20s in the U.S., the 1920s, and that really there weren't any names out there. Mm-hmm. They're obviously in China. When you go there are some names that the developers have heard of, the Nicklases and Mr. Jones and so forth, and so the name will help them in some respects, but it's less of a name thing as much as it is a quality and commitment level element. Because over there they can sell me as the greatest thing since sliced bread, and because they don't know of the names over there, so I'm competing a little bit less against names than I had to in the U.S. up until now. And we're trying to build our name, and we've done a lot of good work, and so recent projects in the U.S. and one in Mexico have helped us elevate name recognition. But Mr. Jones has been at it for twice as long as I have, so his name recognition is obviously going to be better.
Yeah. Now, when you mentioned the boom in golf architecture and construction, new construction, there was a boom in the 50s, 60s. There was a lot of real estate being developed. There was also a boom, you said, around the 90s. I see that it's interesting. It's a chicken and the egg situation of that time in the 50s, 60s. That was when Palmer and Nicklaus were at their peak. In the 90s, you had Tiger, Phil, Greg Norman. Does construction follow the PGA Tour excitement, or does it promote more interest with golf courses going up that people are playing, and then all of a sudden these guys become superstars? What do you think, from your perspective, where that comes from?
Well, I think the excitement level on the PGA Tour in terms of the number of, or the types of players, the number of players that golfers around the world can identify with, and or it excites new people into the game, certainly doesn't hurt. I think from a golf course construction perspective, I think it is a minor factor. I think the economy as a whole is a much stronger factor. But it certainly doesn't hurt. And, I think when Palmer and Nicklaus were, and Gary Player at that time were going after each other, it certainly developed a more worldwide and broader appeal to the game, just simply because people wanted to follow the drama behind it. And you had the same thing with Tiger Woods coming out and how he introduced more people to the game, especially getting younger players excited to play. And so it doesn't hurt, but, in general, I think what it does follow more so than anything is the economy. The last boom, really prior to the, late 50s, early 60s, was in the 20s, and, during another economic boom in the United States. And so, in that time frame, actually, we had Bobby Jones and Walter Hagen and so forth. But, if you look at the period in the 30s and the 40s and even early 50s, when you had Hogan and Snead and Mr. Nelson, there was a broad interest in the game following those guys. That you didn't see much in the way of golf course development, just because the economy wasn't very good.
Why'd you refer to him as Mr. Nelson and the other guys by their first name? Did you forget his?
Well, I got to know Mr. Nelson. And,
is that right?
We redid Preston Trail in Dallas, Texas, in 2008 and 2009. And that was a course that Mr. Nelson helped design with Ralph Plummer, and he was one of the founding members. And so before we did the project, before we started design, I got to know him and spend some time with him and talk with him about what we were going to do, and never met anyone like him. And there's a definite reference there that I have for him. I never got to know Mr. Snead or Mr. Hogan.
And was he Mr. Nelson to his face? You never called him Byron?
No, I called him Mr. Nelson.
Wow.
But I grew up in South Georgia, and anytime I didn't say Mr. or Mrs., I got my ear clipped pretty hard by my dad. So.
It's a different world today.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to get my girls, I have 2 daughters, and I'm trying to get them to do the same thing. Instead of saying, yeah, or I'll try to say yes, ma'am, yes, sir, and call people by their last name as well. So, Mr. and Mrs. But yeah, here's there I go. Yeah, it's definitely is a different world in a lot of respects.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we are definitely part of a different world. Got an email the other day about texting for senior citizens, how kids have their own language, LOL and all those things. And one of them was DWI, driving while incontinent. I'm going to be coming down to Dallas. We've talked about this before, but I want to bring it back up. I'm going to be coming down to Dallas for April 1st weekend, and you've got 2 courses down. If anybody's down there and maybe want to play on Sunday afternoon, maybe you should email me. But I'm going to be you have 2 courses that I've always been fascinated about, and we've talked about them in the past. I'd like to bring them back up again, that you did near Dallas in the Colony, Texas. The Tribute and Old American. And these were not normal, hey, here's a piece of land, just go ahead and make a golf course type of. These were more thematic, right?
Well, the Tribute is definitely more thematic. The Tribute we opened in 2000, and when we were hired to do that project, we had, that was another project where we were fortunate to beat out some of the big names to get it, and one of the reasons why is the concept that we threw out and ended up implementing was to build holes that were in the style of some of my favorite holes from Scotland and blend it into 18 holes that work together. A lot of the golf courses that had been done before, where there were more copies of particular holes, I found that the golf course didn't have a certain flow or it didn't have a certain rhythm to it. It was just a collection of 18 holes. And, any great golf course has got a certain flow or rhythm to it. So that was something we were trying to implement. So the Tribute is very similar to when Charles Blair McDonald back in the early 1900s built the National Golf Links. It was built and patterned as tributes to his favorite holes from around the world. And that's what we did with the Tribute.
How hard of a sell was that for you, to the owners?
Well, at the time, it wasn't that. That was right when the Tour 18 courses were were coming out. Royal Links and Las Vegas had been built, and that was kind of a trend at the time. And so that was something that, in terms of selling, it was it made it a little easier then than it probably would now if there were any golf courses being built. But the trick, though, and the reason why it's been ranked in the top 100 public courses in the U.S. is because it's not just a collection of 18 holes. It really does feel like one golf course.
Awesome. And what about Old American?
Old American is very different in that it's still themed after a early American style of architecture. We had always intended to do 2 golf courses there, and Jack Matthews, who's the developer of both golf courses, he does a lot of real estate, other types of real estate development, and is very big on having those themed in some way. He bought a Gillies country western bar to downtown Dallas, and that's obviously a theme type of deal as well. And the original concept was that the first course would be a look back in time at early, at Scottish courses, whereas the second course would be a look back in time at early American courses, what happened to the game when it came over to the United States. And the second course was not intended to be plays on individual holes as much as it was the style of architecture in the 1920s. And so the golf course is intended to have that feel and that type of option-oriented strategy that you found with golf courses that were built in the 20s, like Crystal Downs up in Michigan and Prairie Dunes, National Golf Links, which was built prior to the 20s. But that was the intent with the second course. And we had a better piece of land to work with. And Justin Leonard was also someone that I got involved because of his love of early American architecture. And the fact that he's from Dallas, it helped from a marketing perspective as well. But it was unique because Justin really shared a lot of his experiences playing those old golf courses, major championships, and got very, very involved in the process. It wasn't just something he was putting his name on.
What do you mean by he shared a lot of his knowledge on the design of the golf course and his experience of playing those courses? I mean, because you've played those courses too, but how does playing competitively at that level differ on your view of the course?
Well, I've played competitively in college and still play some amateur golf, and you definitely look at a golf course differently when you're playing it as a competitor than you would just out playing it for fun. And what you really pick up more than anything is subtleties, because those little subtleties in the way that a green may slope and the way that a hole may be angled impact the way you're going to score. And when you've got to add them up at the end of the round and sign your name, and it gets put up on a board, in Justin's case, is the difference between winning a British Open or winning a PGA or winning a U.S. Open. Those subtleties really come into greater focus under those circumstances than they would if you just went out and looked at things and played the golf course. I spend a lot of time walking around and looking at courses and studying some of the older courses, and I really try when I'm doing that to look at how the subtle features of the hole impact the way that the player is going to play the hole and how it's going to affect scoring, because that is more important to the longevity of that feature or that hole or that golf course than just how cool it looks.
Yeah, and I want to, if you don't mind, I would love to have you come back for one of our members-only episodes on our next episode. If you can hang a bit with me more, I really want to talk about design strategy and what it is that you look at a hole and put yourself in the, let's say, non-competitive, the amateur player, and put yourself in their mind when you're designing a hole and how that works for you, and then how do we translate that when we're out on the golf course? Can you spend more time talking about this?
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you. So what that means is that if you are not subscribe to Golf Smarter for members only, and you want to continue listening to this conversation with Tripp Davis, because next week is going to be a members only episode. Please keep this listener-supported podcast alive by joining Golf Smarter for members only. Not only will you get a new episode every single week, you also have complete access to our archives of over 300 different evergreen interviews of the Golf Smarter podcast. So please join Golf Smarter for members only at golfsmarter.com. Tripp Davis is at tdagolf.net. And I have so many more questions. I really appreciate you spending the time, and appreciate that you are going to be coming back for another episode.
Well, you're welcome. I look forward to it. That's one thing I love doing, is talking about golf course design. So when I've got the time, I'll be happy to talk about it.